I've cut this down to the length that I wanted it now, and I'm just going to use an emery stick to round the edges off. So you don't want it completely flat, but you don't want it a really sharp point either. It's somewhere in the middle, a slightly rounded point. Okay, so you can just test that by gently pressing against it. You should just be able to feel a little bit of sharpness, but not enough to actually go into your finger. That should help it to just glide through fabric, but not get stuck and not injure you. And you can see now that we've shortened it so it's not going to be visible, and it just clicks into place and holds there nicely. The next thing that I'm going to do is make the adapter so that this can be worn as a pendant as well. And to do that, I'm going to use some more of the same silver tube that we used for the hinge section over here. So this is 1mm internal diameter tube. The reason that we use this is because it slides really neatly over this 0.8mm wire. So you can just see that that slides on really nicely. And then what we're going to do is solder some bales onto this so that you can actually put a chain through and wear this as a pendant as well. So I'll mark where this needs to be cut while I've got this on here. So you want it so that it's not going to get stuck in the clasp. So I'm just going to mark it about there. That will be about right to cut that. And take that back off. And I'll just move this down to my bench peg to cut that tube. So I've actually filed a little recess into my bench peg, which is really handy for holding tube or holding wire when you're trying to cut it. So that's the great thing about the wooden bench pegs, is that you can actually just adapt them for what you need them, you know, for their best use. So I'll just cut through this. There we go. The other nice thing about having that recess there is it stops the tube from flying across the workshop. Okay, so that's going to be the right length to go onto the pin as an adapter. And the next thing I'm going to do is solder some of these square runners or oblong runners onto it, which will then have the chain fed through. You can use square tube or you could use jump rings. These little rectangular runners are actually the end caps for adjustable bracelets, so the christening style bangles that you get, these are sold as the runners for those, and you can get them from most jewellery suppliers. So just move over to the soldering block to get this set up to solder these two pieces on. The next thing to do is to solder these two rectangles onto the tube, and that will form the adapter that goes over the brooch pin. So I'm just going to tilt these up and pop them in place. I want to try and get them relatively even. There we go. And again, I'm just going to heat them up gently and use the spray flux, and that will help hold them in place for soldering. Okay. Again, I'm going to use easy solder for this. I'm going to just drop the solder palliums. Oops. I'm going to try and drop the solder palliums in Okay, so I'm just going to drop the solder palliums so they're nudged up against both the tube and the little rectangles. Oops. There we go. And I'm just going to direct the flame around, and it shouldn't take too long for this to go because this is easy solder. There we go. Perfect. So that's soldered on both sides. So I just dropped that in the pickle, and that is the adapter for the pin done. I'm just going to add another one of these little rectangles to the opposite side of these two. That will help to balance this when you're using it on the back of the brooch pin. So by having this one at the bottom, it'll actually secure this whole adapter against the back of the brooch, and it'll be like you've got a solid bail on there rather than a piece that's attached and can swing. So I'm going to use easy solder again, and we'll just get this set up to solder. So coming in with gentle heat, just add some spray flux. And then she'll just add my solder in there. I'm going to concentrate around, and this should solder relatively quickly. There we go, that's soldered. So that just goes back in the pickle, and then we can finish putting the brooch together. The next thing I'm going to do is just clean up the inside of the bezel cup, and then we'll get the stone set, and then we can move on to patinaing the main part of the brooch. So to clean up the inside of the bezel cup, I'm going to use a scratch brush. This is a little fiberglass brush, and you can just scrub around inside the bezel with this. Because this isn't particularly in need of that much cleanup, it'll just give it a bit of a shinier finish. If there was loads of extra solder in here, I'd have to get in here with either a file or a small burr and just make sure that was taken out, because otherwise the stone wouldn't sit level. But because there's nothing really in there, we'll just give it a bit of a clean with this. This is really new, so the first thing I need to do with this is to just break the edge a little bit. So you can just do that with your thumb. Just be a bit careful you don't get the fibres off and into you. There we go. So you can see that just sort of slightly burnishes the surface, and it comes up as a shinier surface. The nice thing about these scratch brushes is you can just keep twisting them up from the end, a little bit like a mechanical pencil, and you get more of the brush out of the actual pen itself. There we go. That's a much shinier surface. I'm not too worried about the fact that there's some little visible scratches or there's some visible swirl marks off the brush. Because I'm using an opaque stone, you're not going to be able to see the back plate through the stone. So just get the dust out of there. And the next thing I'm going to do is get the stone set. If this was a much smaller stone, I would be securing this in something like some polymorph, just to keep it nice and still and to be able to set it easier. Because of the size of this, I said it's about 10mm, it's fine to just do it on the edge of your steel block or the edge of your bench pin, and you'll be able to get enough resistance with your hands to be able to set it. So we'll just pop the stone into the bezel, and that sits down really nicely. So you can see that that's just clicked into place. And now what I'm going to do is just push each of these little prongs over with a square pusher. The nice thing about using this gallery wire is that it pushes over really easily, and it gives a really nice look to your bezel. If you don't have the gallery wire, you could just use normal bezel wire, or you could even prong set this type of stone if you enjoy prong setting. So we just push these over, and you can see that they don't take a great deal of force to push over. I'm coming all the way around. Let's get those last two in. And there we go. That's our stone set. You can see that beautiful flash of colour from the labradorite. I'm going to patina the moth just to give it a different texture. And to do this, I'm using platinol, which is an oxidizing solution. It's similar to liver of sulphur, but it's nowhere near as smelly. And I find that it gives you a really nice dark finish on silver. Liver of sulphur is brilliant if you want to try and get different colours through, but the platinol tends to just go really dark, and it's a really good way of patinaing. I use a watercolour brush with my patina. I just find it a much easier way of controlling where I'm putting it. So this has just got a little reservoir with the platinol solution in it, and then it's a brush tip at the end, which makes it a lot easier for you to control where you're putting this patina. You don't need to use it warm, and you don't need to have your silver warm, but you do need to make sure that your silver's fairly clean, so out of the pickle and just wiped down, and that is perfect. I've got my piece on some tissue because you don't really want this solution going on to any of your steel block or anything like that, because it will start to actually tarnish the steel block. Obviously you can clean it up, but it's easier to not have that happen in the first place. So I'm just going to start by bringing some of the solution down onto the brush just by squeezing that, and you can see that it just starts to come down. Then we can drop it onto our piece, and you can see that it instantly starts to darken. So we'll just go all over this, and we'll just paint it on. You just squeeze a little bit extra down if you need it. As I said, doing it with this brush pen, it's just made it so much easier to control rather than dipping the whole piece. You've got less cleanup at the end, which is always a bonus. I just put one last drop there, and you can see how quickly that darkens down to black. I'm going to just do, oops, missed that one piece there. I'm just going to do the inside of the crescent moons, otherwise that'll look a bit strange with them partially done. And there we go. And then I'm going to leave that to dry, and then I'll buff that back so it takes off some of the patina and it leaves some nice high spots and some the patina left into the stamped recesses, so they'll really show up nicely against the silver. Really, we just need to leave this to dry until you can't see the liquid shining on the surface. So probably around about 5 minutes. If your workshop's warmer, it'll probably dry quicker. And obviously if you can't wait, if you need to get on and do something else, you can just gently pat it down with a tissue. The nice thing about this solution is you don't really need to rinse it. So you can just pat it down and then carry on and buff it back. So we'll just leave this to dry for a few minutes and then we can come back in and buff that back when it's dry.